Hello, hi, greetings. Welcome to my general guide to frag boosting. So, since no one has made a tutorial about frag boosting as a technique, I figured it would be a good idea to condense everything that I've learned to understand that I can put into words into this video. This guide is not about learning specific setups or routes. My goal with this video is to get more people to understand frag boost on a more intuitive level to allow for more improvisation and experimentation. The general structure of a frag boost remains the same pretty much everywhere. You start by pulling the nade at a certain time, then you hold it in your hand until the moment before it explodes, then you throw or drop the frag in such a way that it explodes directly behind you. There is of course a lot more to it than that. With every frag boost there will be a lot of moving parts that you'll have to either control or adjust to. Whenever you press a button to pull a nade, it takes about 3.5 seconds from that input for the grenade to explode. Within that time, the goal is always to have the grenade explode directly behind you while finding that sweet spot of the biggest possible boost and getting right to the edge of death without actually dying. A great starting point for any frag boost in my opinion is to think of where you want to get your boost and try to pull the frag 3 to 4 seconds before reaching that spot, waiting for the grenade to beep and then throwing it straight down. I personally prefer throwing the frag straight down rather than dropping it in front of myself as I'm moving, because when dropping the frag in front, it will travel forward a bit before landing and coming to a standstill, whereas the frag thrown straight down will stay pretty much exactly where you threw it. This means that if we were to leave them at the same time and at the same speed, the dropped frag will explode closer to you, meaning there's a higher risk of dying. If you wanted both frags to explode on the same spot, we would have to drop the frag earlier than we would have to throw it. A byproduct of this is that when dropping the frag, in a lot of cases the beep is just an audio cue for, "You fucked up and dropped me too late, so now you are going to die." Whereas for the thrown frag, you can use it as a cue for when to actually throw the frag. I say in a lot of cases because this doesn't perfectly apply to every situation, mainly due to variance in player speed, which I will get into in a bit. What speaks in favor of dropping the frag is the no need for quick camera movements. If, for example, the frag boost is followed by very difficult strafes or wall kicks that are easier if you can actually see where you're going, dropping the frag could be the better choice. In most cases, however, it will come down to personal preference and what you want to choose as your cue for leaving the frag. Whether that be the grenade beep, your slide hop rhythm, or a certain object appearing or disappearing from your screen, there are a lot of things to latch onto when routing visual or audio cues, and I encourage you to find what feels most comfortable and consistent for you. The biggest variable that will often come into play when doing frag boosts is your own speed. Without changing any timing, going faster means traveling further away from the frag after dropping it, and going slower means not traveling as far in the same amount of time. This will end up putting you in different regions of the frag's damage radius. In practice, going faster gets you weaker boosts and going slower gets you killed. Generally, the way to adapt to this is to make minor adjustments to when and where to drop or throw the frag. Higher speed means drop later, lower speed means drop earlier. The specifics of how much you need to adjust is one of those things that's hard to describe and will come mostly with experience and an intuitive understanding of the frag's timing and how speed affects your distance traveled. Another important factor to take into consideration is your current health and speed of your health regeneration. Although it doesn't come into play all that often, it should be noted that a good frag boost will leave you on very low health, so low that 1 or 2 hits from an enemy, even on easy difficulty, can kill you. The reverse can also mess you up. If you take any damage as you're setting up a frag boost, you might have to adjust by leaving the frag earlier to reduce the damage taken from the boost, depending on if your health is able to regenerate quickly enough. The last variable that one can adjust to is the terrain. Depending on how the surface that you're throwing your nade onto is angled, the trajectory of the frag will be ever so slightly different, which can affect the timing or throw direction in minor ways. An example of this in the route is this cylinder in Blood and Rust, where the top is angled slightly towards the edges, meaning that for the frag boost as you're passing over it, you can afford to throw it a bit later than usual due to the bounce angle pointing slightly behind you. Another example is the moving wall in Abyss 3, which is angled upwards, causing the grenade to bounce further upwards. To adjust for this, you'll have to throw the frag a little bit lower instead of perfectly horizontal. When it comes to actually putting together a frag boost, there is a kind of thought process that I like to use in the absence of concrete setups to either improvise or find the routing for a frag boost. I start by choosing the destination of where I want the boost to happen as a sort of soft anchor. I then use that soft anchor to essentially guess where I will be 3.6 seconds before reaching that spot and pull my frag at that point. Once the frag is pulled, that becomes the hard anchor, since it can no longer be moved or changed in any way. From there, taking the fuse timer, speed, terrain, route, and health into consideration, I will either drop or throw my frag, ideally within the area that I've previously chosen as the soft anchor. This is of course a very elaborate way of describing an improvised frag boost, and this thought process doesn't happen consciously. In fact, the only time you will even want to use the entirety of this thought process is when experimenting with routes outside of runs to find new places to frag boost and setups for those frag boosts. If there is any bit of a setup that you already know, parts of this anchoring thought process aren't even necessary in the first place. For example, if you have a specific point in your route where you pull the frag, you don't at all have to worry about choosing a soft anchor and timing a frag pull anymore, and all you need to think about is when and where to leave the frag. This is personally my favorite way of doing frag boosting runs, as it is a nice mixture of having a concrete and consistent setup, while still allowing for some improvisation to adjust and balance safety versus a bigger boost. Alright, now to close it off, I'm just going to list off a few tidbits that might be either helpful or just interesting to know. Number 1, neither grenade throws nor drops are 100% consistent every time. The grenade will always bounce ever so slightly differently. There's no reasonable way of adjusting for this, but other than in a few exceptions like for BBRJ, the effects of this randomness are very minimal. Number 2, splash damage can and will get completely blocked by any geometry that comes in between the grenade and the target. If you've ever wondered why you took 0 damage and got 0 boost from a frag, this is exactly why. Number 3, ragdolls can block a part of a grenade's damage without affecting the boost, theoretically allowing for much larger boosts. This is not being used anywhere as of now, as the conditions are very precise and hard to control. Number 4, any kind of damage boost, meaning frag boost, EPG boost, archer boost, and so on, will only increase your speed if you're moving below 1,000 units or 90 kilometers per hour. So they will give you speed in most RTA scenarios, but for sequences like super fastball or fast fans, damage boosts have no effect and are only used at the end of each when we slow down enough for damage boost to be worth it. Alright, that should cover the majority of what I can put into a video. Frag boosting is a hard thing to try to teach because it really is something that you have to either understand on an intuitive level or practice setups for a lot to make consistent. So I hope that this video contained at least some useful information for everyone. But yeah, that's it. Yeah, class is over. You can go home.